Welcome back to another edition of the Arsenal Teacher, where you can learn, chat, and debate about the beautiful game. We're going to start off with a weekend roundup, but it's such a beautiful day. We've got a brand new black Arsenal jersey on that I just got. It's taken quite some time to get from Arsenal Direct because I'm just assuming that there are just so many fans really excited about what's happening at the Arsenal right now. And officially, Arsenal are on top of the league, and it feels so good. Now, as any Arsenal fan knows, it's the hope that kills you. So right now, I'm just trying to live in the moment, knowing we're playing quality football and deserve to be in the position we are in. It's a long season, and the transfer window isn't closed yet, so we don't know what kind of firepower teams may get, but it also looks like we could bring in another winger, and Pedro Neto seems to be the top of the list from our standpoint of who we might bring in. There's been talk about a brand new winger, and he's 22 years old and always had a promising prospect. Wenger wanted to sign him, I think it was about 5 years ago, for 15 mil, but it was rejected. And I think he's a great complement to our team and fits our system, style of play, age profile, and he has plenty of Premier League experience. So let's get into the headlines about what's happened over this weekend's Premier League fixtures. We saw a lot of action. Some of the headlines are Chelsea lose 3-0 to Leeds. Tuchel said there were a better team, and anyone who watched the game knows it probably wasn't true. We'll go into that a little bit more detail later in the pod. And there was an incredible game of football played between the two oil-rich nations, Man City and Newcastle, ending in a 3-3 draw. And I'll go into that more as well, because as mentioned in the previous pod, City may not be as strong as they were last year. And I'll go into some of the reasons why. Something feels different about this season. Those nailed on top two spots in the past that Liverpool and City have claimed, the past few years don't seem as nailed on. We see both teams dropping points. And those vying for the spots from about 3 to 8 are struggling to find any sort of rhythm. And then there's Arsenal, the only team with 3 out of 3 wins. The top teams are in transition. And I think it was Clive on Twitter that said last year was our transition year. So are Arsenal well placed to win the league? It's only 3 games in. And of course, I don't want to get ahead of myself again, but this does feel different. We were seeing drop points early on and everywhere. West Ham haven't even scored a goal and sit firmly at the bottom of the table. Liverpool look flat and have 2 points out of 9 against teams they should be beating. Now, granted, Man U came out firing on Monday with a different energy, and probably because Eric Ten Hag had to have laid into him. He dropped a few players. Maguire, that was probably pretty smart. Ronaldo, you can decide on whether that was a smart decision, but it did pay off in the long run. But at the same time, Liverpool didn't look like Liverpool. Liverpool are a better team on paper, but they also look a bit burnt out. And that could be because of the style of play that Jurgen Klopp has, put forth for so many years. Why do they have so many injuries this early on in the season? You got Thiago. You've got Oxlade-Chamberlain, who, granted, has always been on and off the injury list, even when he was playing for Arsenal. Diego Jota's injured. Jones, Matip. Is this a symptom of their high-paced style of play and playing so many games year after year? Is that catching up with players? They are aging, and they're losing Mane is no easy feat to replace. Darwin Nunez will get found out, I think, in this league if he's not smart about how he reacts to defenders. His 3-match timeout will give him some time to think about how he sees his team continue to drop points. Virgil van Dijk hasn't looked the same this season. He looked really poor in terms of defensive decision-making in the Man United game. But even last season, he had a few kind of hiccups, and we saw early on him getting beat by Mitrovic, passed by him, and then giving up a penalty. And, one question I think we can all maybe kind of think in the back of our head, did he ever really fully recover from that Jordan Pickford collision that, kept him out of that entire season 2 seasons ago? Let's check out a few of the other teams that used to be playing for those top spots. Wolves, can't even score a goal. Spurs, they still look like they can't break down that low blocks. So I see them beating teams that come out to play, but those Burnley style, and I know Burnley's not in the league anymore, but those Burnley style teams that sit back, have a low block, ask the teams to break them down and beat them defensively or beat them offensively when they're playing a really strong, organized defense, I think is still going to give them trouble. Spurs, they don't look settled yet or consistent. Chelsea have lost their edge. And again, like I said, they lost 3-0 and only have 4 points out of 9. If Tuchel truly believes his statement that they were the better team, and now I know this is a bit out of context, but nowhere near where they were the better team. And to even consider that statement feels like a disservice to anyone who is watching, your fans, and your players. Maybe he's sticking up for our players, but I think at some level you have to state, we weren't at it. And that doesn't mean that you are going after your players, but understanding the realities. They got American muscled. Leeds look like a well-oiled and ready to ride in the Premier League. They've always been exciting to watch, but now I think under Jesse Marsch, they're more organized. That man-to-man marking that Bielsa had, works for some time, but at some point, which we saw last season, it burns players out, but also teams figure out how to deal with that. You can move players around the pitch when they're marking man-to-man. And I think that's why they really struggled last season against us, because of our rotational play. And a lot of the other teams that do that, like Man City, that doesn't work. You can't man mark those teams. Now, let's move on to City. And I've kind of talked about City in a few other episodes, but, them dropping points to Newcastle seems like there's some cracks in their game. Are City stronger this year? I'm still not sure. I mentioned, like I said in that first podcast, that losing the likes of Jesus, Zinchenko, and Sterling is hard to replace without some integration of new players. Though Pep likes to rotate, he did trust Jesus and Zinchenko when they played in the Champions League semifinal against Real Madrid, who actually won the Champions League last season. Although Sterling may have been out on the out of favor at times and on the periphery, we know he can produce magic and has the quality to take on defenders, shift them off balance, and he was undroppable about 2 seasons ago, and what a quality fantasy football pick he was. Now, I do truly believe Haaland will be a great player. There's little doubt, but he has power, pace, and the ability to finish, but my doubts kind of surround his style, which is different to any other player that Pep has had in his team, and currently a bit one-dimensional. And what I mean by this, it'll take time for the City players to fully appreciate the runs he makes. But also, Man City are a possession-based team. So if teams are sitting back, Haaland may struggle to make that run off the back shoulder of the defenders if there's less space to work in, and really trying to find where that space is in that back line, especially if teams stay in that low block. So my question stems around, can he link up play? Can he drop into different areas to pull defenders away from areas and create space for other players around him? And will other players run off him in the way we've seen City players rotate positionally? Can he play in wider areas to pull the center backs wide, to create space for midfielders, wingers? We've seen very little of Alvarez at this moment, so I can't really mention or even begin to kind of understand his impact to the City team and what holes he may fill. I say all this because we've also seen what happened to Jack Grealish. His season after his blockbuster move was actually quite underwhelming. He holds on to the ball a bit too long, I think, in the Man City style. In my opinion, which it works really good if you're the main focal point in a team, like he was in Aston Villa. But with his slick passing and moving, link-ups is different in half spaces on the pitch, and he still hasn't found his feet in that City jersey, in that system. And, from now, what we can see if I shift kind of this conversation a little bit into Jesus, we can see how multi-dimensional Jesus is now that he's playing for Arsenal and what he's capable of outside of a strict system like Pep Guardiola. He seems like a different player. So with so many changes to the Man City team, with players coming in and others departing, we are seeing how Pep's system incorporates or maybe even hinders players in their natural ability to play to their own strengths. Is Pep too rigid in causing players to not find natural areas in the pitch that they would thrive in? This might seem controversial because of his success, but we know City sign some of the best players because of their funds, oil, they got the money. What would happen if they didn't have that blank check? We've seen Pep overthink his tactics in the past, especially in the Champions League. We've seen him falter, and it still can't seem to get that trophy and make changes too much, in my opinion. And I think that sometimes is really challenging, especially when you have new players trying to adapt to a new system, but then there's a lot of rotation. They're not always playing with the same players. They lack that consistency, so they don't have that instinct of knowing exactly where players are without looking or having to take a little bit more time on the ball. So anyway, enough about Pep. Let's move on to Arsenal news. All right, all I can say is top of the league. Stop the count. Stop the count. 3-0 to a weak Bournemouth team this weekend, who definitely looks like probably the weakest team in the league. But without that, without saying that too much, we were clearly the better team. Here are some of the underlying stats. We are currently the youngest team in the Premier League still, which was true last season, with the youngest manager, and have actually covered the most distance on average from our past 3 games. Now, I've read a few things about distance covered is going to be hard for us to sustain, which I think in theory should be true, and there are some concerns about that in our depth of squad. But we do know that Arteta mentioned 2 years ago that we need to increase our overall fitness as a team, and it would take some time. Well, maybe we are at that time. I think what these numbers are showing, at average 110 kilometers from last season, it increased to 114 kilometers covered. And for reference, Man U have covered 101.6, which is less than their last season. And that we are actually building fitness, and not only that, but intensity when we watch our performances. Now, what this doesn't show is how much intensity in the run. Are we covering distances because we are making more runs and shifting into new areas? Are these sprints, or are we just shifting and moving a bit more and not being so isolated in certain areas? I'd like to unpack this a bit more because this is only one reference point, and the stats, of course, never show the whole picture. But this does say we are working hard on and off the ball, which checks with the eye test, and our team still looks fresh at the end of the game. Reminder, we have 5 subs, and Arteta for the first time used all 5 against Bournemouth. Emile Smith-Rowe came on, had a few shots where he probably could have scored, and Nketiah came on, definitely had a few opportunities, Tierney, Tomiyasu, and Lokonga. Now, that looks like a lot more depth than we've had in the past, especially since we've brought in some amazing players that have already gotten into our starting lineup, and Saliba, Jesus, and Zinchenko. But I would like to see those a bit earlier and give Jesus a rest, because I think we would struggle without his dynamic presence on the field. And the fixtures are going to start coming thick and fast. European football is going to start. We're going to start having the cup games. We have actually 3 games in 9 days coming up. And October, obviously, is kind of our big test for Arsenal. This schedule is going to be the real test for the team, so I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. I'd like to highlight 2 players, though, for obvious reasons, Zinchenko and Saliba, which I've mentioned before, but I will go into more depth in what I'm seeing. I'm going to start with Zinchenko. From a winning league mentality with Man City, that his presence of knowing what it's like to be on top of the table, which we currently are, and how to remain there is priceless. Him and Jesus are proven winners. They are. I think more and more we are seeing his overall technical ability, and his passion for the game and the team. I think it was about the 20th minute of the Bournemouth game. There was a big ball launched, and he was the last man running back to his goal to defend, and he took one touch that took the attacking player completely out of the game. Generally, when this scenario happens, it can be a bit touch and go. Do you pass it back to the keeper, one touch it just to kind of clear it out, or two touch and probably find that pass, which you're likely maybe to get the ball taken off your foot? But his ability to take it down and stop on a dime while the attacking player basically ran past him provided the team and the fans with a different edge of confidence, a different level of, wow, we have something here. I think all of us are still trying to figure out his position, but I think that truly misses the point. Our team has become less position-based and more fluid, where players need to occupy different areas on the pitch at all times, but it doesn't have to be the same player. What's really brilliant about this is this confuses the opposition and makes us extremely unpredictable. And I think that's something that Arsenal has struggled with so much in the past, is we've been very predictable with a horseshoe-shaped type of passing, players stagnant, not running, and now defenders will struggle on whether to follow players or let them move into different areas and spaces on the pitch. And Z, which I'm calling Zinchenko, is one of the main enablers of this. If we think back to last season, Tierney, who plays in that same position, if you consider Zinchenko a left back, Tierney was undroppable. But now that we have Zinchenko, it's clear he's the first choice left back kind of midfielder because of his versatility and his technical ability. Tierney is an excellent defender, don't get me wrong. And I think that's something that he does better than Zinchenko, which actually Zinchenko had a very, very good tackle that just timed it well, kept the ball, didn't have to kick it out of bounds, was able to move the ball up the pitch. But I still think Tierney, positionally and tackling-wise, is a better defender. And we're seeing him in a different light, and that's a testament to the player that we brought in Zinchenko. Tierney was once considered one of our best players about 2 seasons ago. Everybody wanted him to be captain because of his energy. And that was just because he worked so damn hard, and we were missing that mentality. Now that's table stakes for us now. And this shift changes how I see this team building and hopefully moving on to winning some trophies, some bigger ones than just the FA Cup. Not saying that the FA Cup isn't a good trophy, because I'll take it. But I would like to see us winning the league, possibly. I would like to see us winning the Europa League, which I think is a very, very gettable trophy for us in the way that we're playing. And we'll see how that works. Okay, so let's move on to Saliba. Oh, 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 Saliba. If that song is stuck in your head, then you definitely watch the game, because that was going on for the entire game. We have a bunch of new songs for our new players, and that's Saliba's new one in the tune of Tequila. And after 3 games, I think it's clear he's one of the most calm and composed center backs we have on the ball and defending. His passing, when he passes the ball, it's sending a message. It has the right pace for the player to decide, ooh, should I turn? Should I open my body? Or do I have a defender on my back? Should I play it back? Should I run onto this ball, or should I hold my position, wait for, the defender to come on to me and maybe move the ball? So I think that's something special that a lot of people haven't talked about, or we haven't really noticed, because he's doing so many things really, really well. And at the age of 21, it's incredible and insane, his level of composure. He looks unshakable. And I know he'll have his off days, just like any young defender, but his ability to read the game, understand space, when to play into it, when to run into it, and the angles to take when defending is something that most players don't get until they're much further along in their careers. And now we can all say we should have had him earlier. Not send him on loan for, the 3 years back to Saint-Étienne. He went to Nice, Marseille, and playing as soon as we got him. But honestly, hindsight, we couldn't say that he didn't need that development, especially playing game after game in Ligue 1 for Marseille. And honestly, I don't know if I would have wanted Saliba in our team while we were going through that rebuilding phase. It might have hampered his development. It might have developed into a player that didn't have the right mentality, that winner's mentality that we're seeing in our players now. And I don't know if it would have tainted him, but I don't think it would have helped his career progress. He's come back with confidence and plenty of game experience. And that goal, my word, his first goal not only wowed the crowd, Arteta and the entire team, and Zinchenko fell to his knees. Could not believe it after he was standing right behind him and got probably the best view out of all the players on the field. Wow. I still don't think anyone knows what we truly have and how good he can become, and his ceiling seems extremely high. He had the most passes completed at 75 with 100% passing and 100% shooting accuracy, and that fantastic goal that he swept into the top corner with his left foot, and an assist from Xhaka that just seems to be a common occurrence that's happening more and more, these Xhaka assists. We'll see where his numbers are at the end of the season. That'd be something to run, and I'm sure a little bit higher. He's already surpassed in previous seasons, so after 3 games, he's ahead of his season's best from what I understand. These stats are kind of unheard of, though, and we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves again quite yet because we have a young defender, but we need to continue to nurture this young player and lift him up like when he had that own goal. That was perfect, right? And the crowd did that with his new tune, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, ringing through the stadium for those 30 minutes plus, and this was the song that happened even before the goal. So I hope he feels at home in an Arsenal jersey, and we get him to extend his contract. After the game, all the fans went to all the players went to the away side, and we were the loudest fans in the stadium, even though this was an away game in Bournemouth Stadium, all game, to clap and to celebrate that win together, and every player basking in their new tunes. Xhaka even has a new song, like I said. Who would have thought? The Arsenal family is cohesive, and we just need to keep that momentum going. We need to look after our key players. We need to trust the process because we are top of the league, playing good and attractive football and successful football. 9 goals in 3 games is a strong start. And though we've had maybe one of the easier runs of all the teams, and granted that's true, you can only beat what's in front of you, and we are doing just that. Stay humble, stay ready, Arsenal. But this looks like a ride that I'm ready to jump on any day of the week. All right, let's move on to our next topic, and I want to kind of go into Chelsea. We talked about Manchester United last week, and obviously Erik ten Hag figured out some of his issues and was able to, get his win against Liverpool. I still think there was an offsides that was missed, or if we're going to call it the same way that they called it against Jesus in our game, I'm a little bit iffy. But, I like giving the benefit of the doubt to the attacking players. I just want them to be consistent. So props to them. Props to Rashford for, getting off the mark and, taking it home to a Liverpool team that still looks a little touch and go. But let's focus our attention on Chelsea and maybe a USA watch, because go USA. Jesse March has brought in some phenomenal US players. Aronson was a beast in Jesse March's team, scoring a goal from sheer effort after losing the ball in midfield, chasing down a lost cause that pressured Mendy into a terrible mistake, and his first goal of the Premier League with a no-looker. Wow. We've seen a renewed Leeds, and that's not that. I think what we really need to focus on is we've seen a renewed Leeds, and Jesse March kept that identity of Leeds and adding organization. Tactically, he beat Tuchel and his team manhandled Chelsea from the first blow of the whistle. Leeds lost their best midfielder in Calvin Phillips to Man City, and they still dominated. The fact Jesse March kept Leeds in the Premier League last season was a win in my opinion, but this type of tactical display puts USA on the map. I started watching Leeds more when Eddie went on loan and have since always watched their games because of their high intensity. They've always been an exciting team to watch in recent years. And that high intensity has worked for seasons under Bielsa. But again, like I mentioned before, he was a man-to-man marker, and that wasn't sustainable and was found out by the league. It does pull players out of different areas, and creating space is really, really challenging when you're playing man-to-man. It's kind of basic from a footballing and tactical standpoint, but now Leeds are intense and organized. Having a belief to beat Chelsea is powerful, and they found themselves with 7 points after 3 games, and Leeds are sitting pretty high on the table. Not bad at all from the American. Also, Aronson with that first goal of his career in this Premier League was the cherry on top. Koulibaly, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Someone correct me, please. Koulibaly. He got a red card from 2 stupid yellow cards, and that's, it's kind of interesting because he was that final one was when they were already down 3-0. He's now going to miss Chelsea's next game, and as an Arsenal fan, I'm loving it. But from a Chelsea standpoint, this is a veteran player. What in the heck is he doing pulling back for an obvious yellow card? Really stupid in my opinion, and I'm not quite sure why you would do something like that while you're already down 3-0. Tuchel, again, I want to talk about his comments, saying clearly they're a better team. Humble and grounded is an important skill and necessity in these moments, and if your team believes that statement, they are not grounded in reality. And if they don't believe it, then they now know you're lying and not grounded in reality. So for me, it just seems like a kind of a lose-lose, and it helps no one. State the facts, regroup. Stay humble, Chelsea. Is Chelsea going through a rebuild? I feel like I can keep saying this about a lot of these top teams, and it feels that way. After losing several key defenders, especially Rudiger and Christensen, they're lacking a true striker. Tuchel has yet to get his men firing, and there was a lot of foreshadowing in the preseason. And we were seeing this translated into the league. I think we were seeing a disorganized club at the moment with no identity. They may have been resting on their laurels after that Champions League victory, which they deservedly won, but after Roman Abramovich having to give up ownership of the club because he's a Russian oligarch. The once blank checkbook and someone who followed the team very closely because he was actually a really big fan, and he did not settle for mediocrity. That's a big hole to fill. Financially, from a leadership standpoint, it was clear what he demanded, and if a coach and a team were not performing, the sack was near. He sacked Mourinho, he sacked Sarri, he sacked top managers from left to right. He didn't hesitate to fire a coach at any point in the season. Even if you were Frank Lampard, he didn't have a chance. Even though he's a club legend in the Blues, could not make it through under the Abramovich era. Now, Chelsea are owned by Todd Boehly, who's not only hampered by financial fair play rules that have hit Chelsea in the past, but he has to clean up the club. And I'm sorry, but from where I'm sitting, he has little knowledge of European football in general. He does understand sports and owns, I think, part ownership of the Los Angeles Dodgers. But I think the complexity of world football is truly outside of his frame of reference. From an outsider perspective, it appears he's just playing what I would say football manager and wants to buy the next shiny object. And I'm curious to understand the overall vision and strategy for this club because I'm still not seeing it. Is Tuchel behind the wheel in this purchase? And like the players that they're bringing in, what is their relationship like and who has the decision-making power? I don't know if these are well established. There are a lot of egos in this sport. And those have to align in order to operate and function to a high level that will allow a team to compete for titles. This feels like a rebuild. It feels like a rebuild for Chelsea, and many players that they bought recently seem to have stalled. Pulisic isn't firing. Havertz is okay, but just doesn't seem to have that flair required or that firepower in his position and goes missing in games. There's no one in that Chelsea team that can change the game, in my opinion. Granted, Sterling may be that player, but Chelsea have more concerns than just gaping holes in the midfield and their back line. They ultimately lost Werner and Lukaku back to those parent clubs and losing a hefty sum. And like I said, the Rudiger and Christensen gone, that back line is struggling. Azpilicueta signed a new contract, but he's not young anymore, so he probably can't play every game. I do think Cucurella was a good purchase, but they also lost Alonso, so that position had to be replaced. So they're not adding additional depth. It might be a slight upgrade, but Alonso was good going forward. So you have to understand the different qualities. James is still trying to find his way. I think he's probably their most dangerous player, but Tuchel keeps playing him in different positions, playing him back in a back three or wing back, and I think that really hampers his style of play. You definitely, I think, in my opinion, want to see James going forward as much as possible and not sitting back, but right now their defense is struggling, so where is he able to find that balance? I think those injuries that are coming into play, Conte obviously will continue to hurt them in that short run without him in the midfield and that hamstring injury. And Mendy isn't looking as confident, in my opinion, with the ball at his feet these days. Obviously, that Aronson blunder won't help his confidence. And just with so many moving parts, it feels like Chelsea are transitioning into a new identity. And it's hard to see or understand what that identity is. Well, that's all I have for this podcast. So thanks for listening, and subscribe to all my channels at The Arsenal Teacher on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter is The Arsenal Teach, and sign up for my Patreon page to start getting exclusive content and access to content, tactics, and more deep dives into the beautiful game. Feel free to leave me feedback, because feedback's a gift, and let me know how I can improve. What would you like me to cover in future podcasts? Thanks again for listening to The Arsenal Teacher, and up the Arsenal.